That's what my new book is about. It's called Hacking the God Code, the Conspiracy to Steal the Human Soul. And the question about transhumanism, I'm flabbergasted at how fast they're putting this into position. Thanks to the WEF and this Harari guy, I'm sure you've heard him speak, and this fanatic race to turn us into robots. And I think it is very similar to the Atlantean downfall. I believe that enough of us will resist, but there's a definite splitting dichotomy, and it has to do, I dare to say, with how many people are willing to let that needle go in, because the software is going in. So I don't know if you're comfortable about talking about that here.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
It's my great pleasure to welcome Patricia Cori to Exopolitics Today. Patricia is a longtime author, metaphysical researcher, and has been hosting her own radio show for quite a few years now. So welcome to the show, Patricia.
Thank you. It's really nice to be on the other side of the interview.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this. It's really great to be able to kind of dive deep into your work, because often when you are interviewed by someone, you don't get to know too much about their body of work. You're so focused on, going through your own material. So now I get a chance to go through your material, and it's really breathtaking, the things that you've been involved in. And I know you've mentioned that you've been involved in metaphysical research, and you've been a clairvoyant and having all kinds of psychic experiences since very young. But something happened in 1996 involving a crop circle. So why don't you walk us through all of that?
Okay. Well, yeah, I've been, I guess I could say I've been a contactee all my life, because even when I was a kid, I was already talking to beings from other dimensions and things like that. So I was, the multi-dimensional, extra-dimensional question was something that I was already open to from birth, let's say. But in 1996, it was a big year. I went twice to Tibet in 1 year. I went to the Maya lands. I went all over the planet in that same year. It was just like, pow. And I went to the crop circles actually, I went to England because I was taking a chromotherapy course in a college there. And I had a dream that I was flying over Stonehenge, and I looked down in the dream and I saw this spiral in the wheat. And I woke up with a start. I heard a voice tell me to pay attention. This was a lock-on point for extra-dimensional contact, and that it was going to be very important for me. So I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was in a dorm with all these women. It was kind of funny. And I was trying not to wake anybody up. I was depicting what I had seen, this big spiral next to Stonehenge. And that weekend we went to Glastonbury for a break from the course. And there's this Julia set crop circle on the wall in a library, picture of the same exact thing, same exact proportions as I had depicted. So I had really not known anything about crop circles until then. I thought that I had heard about Russian craft burning marks in fields, and I just dismissed it as that. And when they said this is the new crop circle, because I stood there agape. What is that? And this bookstore owner said, with one eye askance, it's the new crop circle. And I go, wait a minute, talk to me. What is a crop circle? I didn't think it was this, because for those who don't know, Julia set was this extraordinary crop circle, 151 circles in Fibonacci sequence, laying right all across the street from Stonehenge in broad daylight. So I just couldn't believe it. And when I got back to the college, one of the professors says, well, Patricia, the real reason you're here is not this course. Let me take you to the crop circle. So that's how I ended up getting there. And when I did, and people who have experienced that particular crop circles have had remarkable experiences. It was the strongest one I've ever been in, and I've been in hundreds. It felt like something was pulling me in, and I barely got into the formation, one of the circles. I fell to the ground. I started spinning. I remember hearing myself as sound. I lost physicality. Spin, spin, this really shrill sound until finally I was popped out of my body and off I went on a, let's call it the galactic journey of a lifetime. And I know that in that experience, I was connected with the beings that for 25 years now I've been bringing forward as downloaded information from the Sirian High Council called the Syrian teachings. And when I came back, the guy that had brought me there was standing over me and he says, Patricia, are you okay? And I couldn't even tell you, for those people who know about astral journeying, what it took for me to get back into my body was extraordinary. He said, I'll leave you here. Are you okay? I'll go get the car. I was like, yeah, I'm going to need time. And when I finally sat up, everything was plasma balls, beings walking in and out, alien type creatures, figures. It was an otherworldly experience. So that is what started me on my trajectory of bringing through all these books that have been known to people as the Syrian revelations. It's 25 years now I've been bringing through these books, and an extraordinary journey on a personal level as well.
So can you tell us about the Syrian High Council? I mean, I know you describe them as interdimensional beings, I think sixth density and above.
Yes.
You know, do they kind of take a humanoid form, or some people describe them as kind of feline? So yeah, can you tell us more about them?
So this is very complex because Sirius is a tri-stellar star system. And if you know about the Dogon Tribes and how they identified Sirius A, B, and C before the astronomers actually discovered these stars. So we still have Sirius A in our galaxy, or not in our galaxy, sorry, in our universe. And yes, it is a three-dimensional star. And at one time, according to the Syrians, at one time, there were planetary bodies circulating the star, but no longer. And then Sirius B, which has gone through ascension to the sixth dimension. Those are the beings that I communicate with. And Sirius C, always according to what I bring through, has gone to the fourth dimension. So when people talk about Sirius, it's complicated because the Egyptians celebrated Sirius. And I believe that when they were talking about cat beings and felines, they were talking about planetary bodies that circulated or orbited Sirius A. And also the dolphin-like beings that the Dogon referred to as the Nomo. Do you know the story about the Dogon tribes?
Yeah, I know about the Dogon. So, you know, why don't you just briefly encapsulate exactly what it was that they said about the three-star Sirius system?
So yeah, okay. So the ancient elders of the Dogon tribes were approached by a group of scientists, and because I don't know how their wisdom was brought down to modern day, but it was back, I think, in the late 60s, and they were telling these people that the craft had arrived, these creatures threw out a lake and swam into this lake and then walked out of the lake and started telling them that they were from Sirius. I think they called it Digitaris, and that they were the Nomo people, and they were half fish, half humanoid. And they described to the Dogon elders that there was more than one star. So that they said that there was a dwarf, the dwarf star was what we call Sirius B. And then later, much later, I don't remember the time when, I think Robert Temple's book describes a lot about this Syrian encounter. Sorry, the encounter with the Dogon people from these scientists and astronomers. The long and short of it is that what the Dogon elders had carried down in oral tradition for however long it was, centuries, the scientists discovered, after being told about it by the tribe, they discovered that in fact there was a wobble in the star, and it was caused by the gravitational pull of the dwarf star, which we now call Sirius B. So it was validation of what the tribe had told them had come down from the elders centuries before, which is very exciting. So it's a stellar system, and it's a multi-dimensional stellar system because you've got one star in third, one star in sixth, and one star in fourth. So when people describe the Syrians, and I love it. I mean, I see all these beautiful artistic renderings of these beings. It doesn't resonate with me as far as the beings or the intelligence that I'm connected with, which is beings that have long lost physicality and that are resonating in sixth and seventh dimensional frequencies. And that the cat-like feline beings that resonate also with the ancient Egyptian information would have been from a planetary body that at one time orbited Sirius A.
Right, so that cat-like civilization that was on a planet that orbited Sirius A, now that planet that has ascended, or what do you think happened to that planet? I mean, are we talking Sirius B, the planets there ascended?
The planets ascended, yes. Yes. The planets of Sirius A, okay, it's going to get complicated here. You ready?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
So the Sirius B is in the fourth dimension, and it's giving us a hell of a problem, because that's how you get the story of Nibiru and the fact that it got expelled when the star was ascending into the fourth dimension. Nibiru was one of the planets that orbited it, and it got expelled from that process and kicked back. And that's described in my book, Atlantis Rising, how this star expelled that planet while it was moving to the fourth, and it got stuck in a bizarre orbit between Sirius A and our star, in a sort of electromagnetic orbit, whereas it just didn't have the strength to hold, it wasn't able to hold orbit with Sirius A, and it just kept flinging out. So it's like Sitchin talks about how this planet X, keeps coming in, but he's never described from where. This planet that just seems to move in any, I don't know how many thousands of years. And the Syrians say that it's rotating or orbiting between these two planets. Sorry, between these two stars. I'm tongue-tied today. Between Sirius and our star.
Okay, so the planet Nibiru was part of the Sirius C system, and it was expelled when Sirius C as a star evolved, and Sirius A is currently in third dimension, as is our sun, or third density. So I mean, just to clarify, third density versus third dimension, I know people often distinguish density on the basis of consciousness, and dimensions, of course, something that can be physically measured. So when we're saying Sirius B went into the sixth, are we talking sixth density, or is there a dimension?
So do you really think that the higher dimensions can be measured?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one. It's an interesting one.
I'm not sure that they can be measured. I think that it might just be an issue of semantics, but then again, it's possible with the developments that we're having now scientifically, and string theory and all of the quantum physics that are becoming available to us. But I don't necessarily differentiate between those two concepts.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm just wondering if it might be a frequency thing. That certain stars and planets start to vibrate at a frequency, all of a sudden they might disappear. You know, like the Mayans apparently just disappeared because I think they started to collectively choose to ascend in some way to escape the the Spanish conquistadors, or saw them coming and just decided, okay, let's get out of here before it gets bad?
You know, when I went to Palenque, I was leading a sacred journey, Maya journey, and I went to Palenque and had an extraordinary experience. And I saw in the distance, let's call it a platform, but I saw clearly, psychically, a landing point or departure point where these Mayans just left and ascended. It was visible to me. It was exciting, very, very exciting. I'm not suggesting I saw the whole experience, but I saw a place where that was of such a vibratory frequency that they were able to step into that light and depart. So I agree with you. They chose to do that.
Mhm. Well, the Sirius star system has such a big role in terms of Egyptology. I know that a lot of people have spoken about the Sirius and the Egyptians. So anything you can kind of add to that, just to clarify why it was that the Sirius star system was so important for the Egyptians?
It was important for the Egyptians and also for the Maya. So this is, first of all, I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that they were moving through the ascension process like a guide for future civilizations to observe. So that's one of the important things that we need to consider about Sirius, is that they have been through ascension how many hundreds of thousands of years before us. And again, in a lot of my work, that explains one of the reasons why they're so involved with Earth development, is because they know what we're about to go through. And they want to be able to assist us knowing they've been through it from a planetary point of view, from a stellar point of view. And this is something also very important. I personally believe that our sun is moving through the fourth dimension now. So when people talk about ascension, my work is about not only individual and human ascension, not only Earth ascension, but it's my understanding that actually our star is already moving through, into and through the fourth dimension. And that this is one of the reasons why we're in such a mess here, because the fourth dimension is a sort of clearing station, a karmic clearing station. And we have so many people are in the consciousness of wanting to jump into the fifth dimension, or fifth density, as you called it, and operate or perceive reality from that point of consciousness. But the Syrians say, well, hold on a minute. Why is everybody wanting to leap over the fourth? You've got to go through the fourth before you move on to the higher frequencies. This is where you clear out your karma. And this is where you start to experience the no time. And man, aren't we just? The time warp now, it's not escaping even people that are not minimally awake are experiencing time warp. So that really fits for me, that we are actually not really stuck in 3D anymore as we perceived it perhaps 10, 20 years ago. But in these last few years, I think we're moving through the fourth dimension. So I'm having all kinds of time leaks and it's just unbelievable. I've had many people are having this sense that time is slipping, and then particular experiences that feel like psychic journeying, but they're not. They're just, I describe it as, it's like being in a gym with all the different treadmills on it, and they're all moving at a somewhat different rate. That's how I experienced space-time continuum. And that, when you move forward I'm sure you know the experience of being on the treadmill and having it slip. So you're on the treadmill and it goes zzz, and that is my understanding of what's happening to the space-time continuum and how we are actually moving out of the third dimension and into the fourth. Now, let me just preface this by saying that our perception of the higher dimensions is a sense that we will be beyond 3D consciousness. But I believe and understand that 4D is this transitional field where a lot of things still look physical, still look three-dimensional, but that we're starting to really mutate consciousness to prepare for what we're all looking forward to, which is 5, 6, and on.
Is there anything triggering this ascension? I mean, especially when it comes to planet Earth, I mean, Gaia as a physical entity, our civilization, I guess Western civilization, and of course our sun. So some people talk about a photon belt, that we're entering into a photon belt in the galaxy. So is that the trigger to kind of bring about this movement from third density into fourth density or fourth dimension?
Well, that's a very good point. So I think Barbara Hand Clow started talking about the photon belt 25 years ago, that we were already moving into that position. So there's that. Then there's the great shift in ages. And astronomers and astrologers are still not sure when, in fact, we move to the age of Aquarius. They talk about the vernal equinox still being 100 years away, but other astronomers are saying that we already entered it in 1216, I believe, 2016. So there's a great debate, but there's unquestionably, this is a huge cosmic cycle that is occurring. And whether or not it's 50 years away, or it doesn't really matter, in the great cosmic scheme of things, we're in the machination of these great shifts. And then add to that, that I understand, and I say I understand because I don't proclaim to know a definitive perception of reality. It's my understanding that we're also moving into the fourth dimension, because our soul, our sun soul is moving into the fourth dimension, and we all go with it, all the planets. So that explains why we hear all these shifts in the planets, and planets are heating up and they're spinning faster. Saturn is losing its rings, and all these changes in all of the planetary bodies in our solar system, because one great explanation for that is because it is in fact our sun that is moving on, moving up and out. If we call it up, I don't know if there is an up in space.
Okay, so the sun is part of this ascension.
Very much part. And one more thing is, a lot of people are noticing that the sun isn't yellow anymore, it's white. So some people have been saying that that's because the chemtrails and all of the geo engineering, but I believe that it's because it is refining itself from a 3D density to a higher, lighter vibrational frequency.
So these beings from Sirius B that are now in the sixth density, they are part of the Cedar races. I mean, they talk about a great experiment, that they were involved in the great experiment on Earth, which I assume kind of correlates with around 400, 500,000 years ago, when the Sumerians and Sitchin described all of these experiments beginning. So yeah, do you have any kind of insights into exactly how it was that the Syrians were involved in this great seeding on Earth?
So my information is that it was the Syrians' idea to collect the seed of all these star beings. It was a Syrian experiment, which was later called the Great Experiment. And that was to create, and it veers away a little bit from how Sitchin describes it, but that they believed that they could create, and this really gets into, my new book has got a lot of information about this, that they were playing with DNA. So they were collecting star being DNA from highly advanced civilizations because they wanted to seed a master race on our planet. And that would be Homo sapiens. And that would be a being that was 12-stranded DNA consciousness, Christ consciousness. So that was the original, in my interpretation, intent and plan for the great experiments that took place on Earth. And then we know the Annunaki got involved and disrupted that blueprint, the divine blueprint at that time. But that was the Syrians as multidimensional beings and working with highly evolved star beings from 12 different races. Is that similar to what you understand?
Yeah. So that's similar. That I mean, some describe it as like up to 22 different races lent their DNA to us. But there
Mhm.
seems to be, like in that ballpark of a couple of dozen ET races
Yeah.
that were all part of this great experiment going back 500,000 years. And since that time, we've evolved to where we are now.
And we devolved from the original print because the original blueprint was a 12-stranded Christed being. And we had intervention from these beings, the Anunnaki, who did not want that much light on the planet because they've always wanted to mine the planet and to control the planet. And in comes this great experiment into their little feast of planetary rule and disrupts their plans for the planet, which is to turn this planet into a mining station in space. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I often hear people talk about that 12-stranded DNA or 3-stranded DNA that we are evolving, awakening this third strand. And so, these extra strands, I guess it raises the question of, junk DNA. And
That's
with
right.
these extra strands, I mean, are they, to all intents and purposes, kind of dormant, or are they like in a higher dimensional state? I mean, how can they actually be dismantled completely, or are they just kind of put into a state of dormancy, waiting for the time to be awakened again? So how does that work?
So if you think about the idea that science has been getting away with, and the medical profession, that 90% of our DNA is junk, it's ludicrous. They get to say that they're the scientists and we, the metaphysicians, are tin hat people, but they get away with calling the perfection of creation junk. So 90% of our our DNA is junk, and 90% of our brain is gray matter. No, these are connected and they don't understand. They have no clue about the higher spiritual, metaphysical aspect of our creation. So it's junk and it's gray matter. Well, what's happening is that this DNA it's scattered. So that's why they call it junk. They know it's there, they just don't know what it's supposed to do. And they don't believe that it connects through the pineal gland and activates the gray matter in the brain. So we're these creatures walking around with only 10% of our DNA and brain functioning? I don't think so. And I believe that part of our ascension process is that whether or not we consciously, because this is the work I've been doing for 25 years, helping people activate this DNA, whether or not we're consciously aware that we're doing it, or whether as a natural progression of our ascension, we start to bring these particles or these fragments back into the light of their purpose. I believe that we are activating first a third strand, and this differs from some people who talk about 2 strands, another 2 strands, etc. The council have this beautiful explanation, it's in my books, of how one more strand creates triangulation in the DNA, and that it causes the sacred geometry to serve as a blueprint. And from that, another triangulation of 4, 5, and 6 strands that superimposed on that at the cellular level create the star tetrahedron or the Merkaba within the cell, within the nuclear information, versus the Merkaba that we know Drumvalo Melchizedek made famous on how activating the Merkabic field around us. But imagine if we're able to activate the star Merkaba within the nucleus of every cell, which is what my work is all about.
Well, yeah, that's really fascinating, because I just came across this information about us having a 7th sense. I mean, everyone has heard of the 6th sense, this ability, to intuition, clairvoyance, clairaudience, that sort of thing. But the 7th sense involves our ability to be able to move through space-time. And that immediately raises this issue of, well, that we within us and within our DNA, as you were just describing, we can actually activate, or we are linked into a Merkaba, that our body somehow is part of a Merkaba vehicle, and it's just a sense. It's just like any other sense. You just have to learn how to use it. But we've been like like a person that's been kept in a dark room all their life and is put out in the sun. They can't use their eyes. In a way, we can't use our seventh sense, or this ability to manifest the Merkaba to travel through space-time.
It's so exciting, isn't it? I mean, the question of sacred geometry is now in the foreground of our development. And like I said, Jumvalo brought us that wonderful information about activating the Merkaba within the field, our exterior, or within our energy field. But if we're able to do this at the cellular level, then first of all, and this is the theme, one of the themes in my new book, which I'd love to talk about, I believe that whatever damage is happening to people for reasons that involve the experiment of today, which we don't want to verbalize so that you don't get taken down, that if there's alteration of the DNA through that process, I think that activating the dormant DNA may very well be timed perfectly for us to counteract the damage that is being done, if you get my drift. So in a way, it's kind of wonderful that we were interfered with in that case, because we now have this dormant DNA that's still pure.
The law of unintended consequences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, how exciting. I mean, no matter what happens in reality, in these different dimensions of our perception of everything, we do recognize there's a divine plan underway. And how wonderful it is for us to be experiencing, talking about and experiencing higher dimensional consciousness, extra dimensional beings. And I think, I'm personally much more excited about extra dimensional reality than I am about ET. I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Let's start talking about what's going on in the 6th and 7th dimension, and how these beings are looking down at the material universe as if they're looking in a test tube. Because the Syrians, one of my downloads, they said, if only you could see what we see, while everybody's all aflutter in 3D, it's this pinhead of a reality that you are about to move beyond and look back at it and go, wow, I was there.
Yeah, I remember actually doing some of the Flower of Life workshops back in 2002. And, the whole idea of activating your Merkaba body back then was very exciting, and doing the exercises and to put it simply, I mean, I'm not that gifted psychically, and I just couldn't do it. I mean, I felt that there was something there, but at the end of the day, I couldn't do it. But that was 20 years ago. And so now we're in a new age, and it seems to me, maybe there's been shifts, that things that couldn't be done back then are now achievable, because we are in a very different time-space continuum. Things are being activated, and of course, we are watching the deep states control efforts just collapse systematically. And as that's happening, even though everything looks bleak on the surface, because that's what the mass media wants to do, just dump all this fear porn on us and make us think that everything's going to collapse. The truth is that things are turning around big time. So things that couldn't be done 20 years ago are now achievable.
But do you think it's that it couldn't be done, or that you weren't ready?
Probably I wasn't ready. I think it was probably a much harder period. But yeah, I mean, I definitely wasn't ready. I think many people that tried things like that back in the years, I don't know, when did Drumville start offering his Flower of Life workshops?
Way back. I think it was around when I was starting my work.
Right.
But, obviously, there's also a huge refinement of vibrational frequency that we're in now. So it's definitely an issue of being facilitated by the new energies that are moving through the planet. But I think also, imagine how far you've come personally. We've come individually from trying to meditate to, seeing things happen. I don't know if this is happening to you, but holes appear in reality where I'm like, am I really, what am I looking at here? And time warping hugely. So I think that this is part of, like I said, the fourth dimension is losing time. I think we're moving into the no time. And that's going to be pretty interesting, how to cope with that.
Yeah, I
Because
think
our
you're.
perception of reality involves time.
Mhm.
How could possibly be without time? And of course, that's all about being in the now moment and knowing that's all you've got, and that you can change anything around you because you're holding energy in that conscious set mindset.
Well, I know one of the things you talk about in your books is the idea that we are living, or the Syrians saying that we are living in multiple realities and timelines simultaneously. So how does that work? I mean, because I know people, think of reincarnation like, oh, it's a linear process. You might have been reincarnated in ancient Rome or Atlantis, and then in medieval Europe, and now it's all a linear process, and you're learning. But what you were told by the Syrians is that it's actually very different. That everything is happening at the same time, involving ourselves in different realities and different timelines. So how does all that work?
Oh boy, if I could explain that, I would be Einstein. um, all right, I'm going to do my best to explain this to you. I had on my radio show, I had Michio Kaku. I'm sure you know him. And that was one of the headiest conversations I ever had with regard to parallel universes and our existence in different realities. And basically, I concur with him that we exist on many different realities, many different densities, and possibly very different planetary beings in 3D, which is almost impossible to understand. But that, for example, where do we go when we dream? Let's just take the dream. People take dreaming for granted, but 8 hours or more of your life, for a lot of people, you're in another complete realm. Where are you? Is that the reality or is this? And it's a question that nobody can answer, but we need to think about it. 8 hours of our life every day are on another plane. So that's the first question. And then Michio Kaku said, look, we believe that it's possible that the universe, I laugh because everything with Michio Kaku and all of these physicists is a concept or a theory, right? We have this theory, we call it the bubbling, what did he say? The jacuzzi creation syndrome or theory. I go, okay, what's that? And he said, we believe that one possibility is that there is no Big Bang, but that everything is constantly brewing, and it's like a bubble bath, and the universe is nothing but bubbles. And so where you've got one universe is a bubble, there's another universe that's a bubble, and where they touch is where that film is very possibly the three-dimensional reality. And I said, okay, so what about inside the bubbles? And he goes, that's the question that's going to drive us crazy. But that is something that really comes home to me, is I believe that we are popping in and out of reality and creating new worlds, new situations, new realities in very similar mirror image environments to one we're in now. Probable realities, possible realities. I just think that we're learning that we are multidimensional beings. We're not limited to this one element, one planet, one environment that we know as our lives on Earth. And how that works, boy, simultaneous reality. But I think we're going to have to learn pretty soon. And it's hard. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of something that happened to me. I was in Norway, and I was going on a cruise, and I went into this camera shop because I wanted a clicker for my cameras. I was dreaming of taking pictures of the Northern Lights, and I thought, I'm going to need a clicker because the camera will move. So I walk in, I find this shop, and it was closed. I didn't walk in, sorry. And it was snow, it was cold, and I just thought, oh, got to get back here before I get on the ship. And I'm looking in, there was nobody in, lights out, and the thing said it was open at 8 in the morning. I go back the next morning. I walk in and this guy says, did you come back for the clicker? And, I have a lot of psychic experiences, so I'm not new to weird phenomenon happening, but this was different. I said, I'm sorry? He said, the clicker, it was a cannon, right? I go, yes. He walks over, he picks up the clicker, and he goes to the cash register, and I just was flabbergasted. I said, how did you know that I wanted this clicker? He said, I'm the guy that served you, remember? I go, oh, yeah, okay. Paid and walked because I didn't think that I should open a multidimensional conversation with this character. But I thought to myself, okay, what just happened here? This is different than anything I've experienced. Did he have a moment where he went into the future and came back? But it didn't make sense. It still doesn't make sense. For him to say, I'm the one who served you, it's like, what happened? Was there an oop part where I slipped out of the planet? I don't know. But this is happening. It happens to me more and more. And people are starting to have these kinds of experiences that can't be categorized as psychic, can't be deja vu. It's different. And what it feels like to me is the space-time continuum is slipping.
Yeah.
So that time progression, as we understand it, it's slipping. It's an unknown. We've never seen it happen like this.
Yeah, I've noticed things like that happening all the time. I'm often looking for things, and sure enough, I'm looking for things, and then I'll come back, and a place where I look very closely, it's right there. And it's like, how did that get there? I looked there just a few minutes ago, and there it is.
Yeah, and you think, I'm getting the first signs of Alzheimer's. Like the classic one is of keys. I always keep my keys in the same place. And I go to there and they're not there. And then I come back and they're sitting on the hook. And it's like, either I'm getting dementia, or there's a gremlin, or I'm slipping, the time is slipping. So it's slipping into the future. I don't know how to describe it, but I think that more and more of us are going to be dealing with this now, because as you said, it's happening to me a lot.
Yeah.
And I think we don't know how to identify it or categorize it quite yet, because it's new. In the world of psychic phenomenon and all the different manifestations, this is new. It feels different.
Yeah, I noticed, in reading the Seth material where Jane Roberts talked about the ability to connect with our past selves and our future selves, that as you make those connections, you can influence things at that time. So it's not just, things aren't fixed at all. So if you can influence your past and future selves and they can interact with you to change the timeline, then, we might see things like this. And I suspect it might be just, as we get out of this kind of rigid linear way of thinking and move into a more multidimensional way of thinking, it's just like, things like that are normal. Oh, the timeline shifted. Oh, because the timeline's fluid, and it's not fixed. Timelines, but there are big things, like I think things like, Nazi Germany lost the Second World War. Things like that that the American North won the Civil War, that things like that stay the same, like they're kind of like anchors in time, but that a lot of other things around that or associated with those events are much more malleable.
Yeah, they're markers in time for sure. I agree with that. And however, we're moving toward I can't say time, an experience where maybe they aren't that fixed.
Well, that's an interesting one, because this is like one that really fascinates me. Like, people think of Atlantis. Okay, Atlantis, they think, well, Atlantis, Plato said that Atlantis collapsed 11,600 BC, that it just sank beneath the waves after how many millennia of being a thriving civilization, and so it's come and gone. But if we adopt this multidimensional way of looking at things, well, Atlantis exists in the now, just it's in a different time frame, and I know you were an Atlantean, so you in that part of you that's in Atlantis now, that you might be connected with that in the now, and somehow there can be a kind of an interaction and interchange, and maybe that's influencing you. I was going to ask you about, why did you choose to live in the Azores, but we'll get to that. But yeah, I think this multidimensional aspect of who we are and being comfortable with that is part of this evolution into a fourth density, fifth density existence.
And as far as you said, we'll get to that, but I just want to add that when I came here because I was channeling a book from the whales and dolphins for humankind. And I knew that I had to get in the water with them, otherwise I was a fraud. And I was terrified to get in the water because I have this bizarre shark fear that I've never been, irrational shark fear. I guess growing up in California and hearing stories, I was terrified of sharks. And I thought, well, I guess I'm going to clear out the shark fear and have the opportunity to be with the dolphins as part of this process. And the only place that made sense to go to was the Azores, because they, at the time, the agent said, well, we could put you in Egypt. She said, they're more tame there. I said, I don't do tame. She said, well, are you a good swimmer? Of course, which I'm not. So I came here to the Azores. And as soon as I flew over the Azores, I went, oh my God, this is Atlantis. I didn't have any prior knowledge of Azores as Atlantis until then. I was just like, it's here. And that's why I moved here. From Atlantis, I began this earth journey, and from Atlantis, I will leave my reincarnation experience on Earth. So I'm back in Atlantis. And, as far as it being the timeline shifting, I think that the fact that we still talk about Atlantis, we've brought it into what we consider the present and the future. It never dies. It's never gone. And the fact that we carry it in our consciousness, whether or not we are old Atlantean reincarnated souls or whether we're just fascinated by it, the truth is that no matter how historians want to dismiss this as fantasy, nothing this powerful can be fantasy that carries on over hundreds of thousands of years. Because I believe that Atlantis was 100,000 years of civilization.
I think so too. I think that would explain the incredible influence that it's had on our planet at an etheric, at a consciousness level. That it was, you look at the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire it started around 600, 700 BC, and depending if you count Byzantium, it lasted either 1,000 years or 2,000 years. But that's had such a heavy imprint on Western civilization. So imagine Atlantis that had lasted 20, 30, 40,000 years with all these incredibly advanced technologies that even now are kind of part of our mythology, but they're slowly being revealed. More and more is coming out about them. Yeah,
and in my understanding, it was 100,000 years, but we don't have to be precise about that because it's conjecture in many ways. But I always remind people, consider how life has changed on planet Earth in the last 100 years. And then imagine 100,000, 50,000 years, the peaks and valleys of development, of technology, of destruction, and then rebuilding, etc. And that it's hard for us to fathom it because look, 20 years ago, we had no cell phones and computers. 25 years, right? It was a very different world, wasn't it? Imagine 100,000 years, 50,000. It's beyond my perception in a lot of ways. And I think that Atlantis had primitive, very primitive moments and highly evolved moments, dark and light, etc. Part of the cycle of life.
As I understand it, during the Atlantean era, you had Atlantis, concentrated in the Azores with colonies around the world, probably, I'm sure Antarctica was one of those. And the Atlanteans had all these incredible technologies that only a few people, or in terms of the overall population on the planet at the time, I think only a few were evolved genetically or through consciousness to be able to use these advanced technologies. But I think that from what I understand, that the Atlanteans kind of like, the civilized aspect was a much smaller proportion of the overall population of the earth, as opposed to us, where, you look at people in the Amazon jungles or New Guinea, those that live in a primitive state, maybe it's 1 or 2% of the population. The rest of the planet, even though they might not have direct access to high tech, or even though they can't afford it, they can still have potentially access. But during the Atlantean era, as I understand it, only a small percentage had access to the advanced tech.
That's how I understand it too. And I also understand that in the end, it was their demise. And in the later century, the later years of Atlantis, they were messing around with DNA also. And that when you look at these iconic figures in so many different civilizations, and especially the Egyptians, were they really representing the qualities of the eagle and a humanoid body? Were they depicting the gods as having these qualities of these lofty animals like the feline people, the Sekhmet characters? Or were they actually fused with DNA? Were they chimeras? And I think the Atlanteans were the gods represented in Egypt. At least they were involved. Mm-hmm. I don't think Egypt comes out of 42 tribes of shepherds to the high civilization of Egypt overnight. I believe that there was an influence, and that influence was most surely Atlantis.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, because I know that's been the explanation that a number of, I think Edgar Casey talked about that, the chimera, the DNA experiments where they fused human and animal, that helped explain the demise of Atlantis, that consciousness somehow got corrupted, and eventually Gaia just said, well, you're out of here. Now, are we kind of like doing something similar now, not so much with animals, but with machines, with technology? I mean, the transhumanist movement is growing. There's a lot of people, especially in Google, that are really pushing it. So, what's the danger there that this transhumanist trend can succeed, and all of a sudden we find a lot of people going into smart cities and having neural implants so that they can interface with machines, and others like normies are like kept in rural parts and separated? Could that be a problem in the future years?
Well, that's what my new book is about. It's called Hacking the God Code: The Conspiracy to Steal the Human Soul. And the question about transhumanism, I'm flabbergasted at how fast they're putting this into position. Thanks to the WEF and this Harari guy, I'm sure you've heard him speak, and this fanatic race to turn us into robots. And I think it is very similar to the Atlantean downfall. I believe that enough of us will resist, but there's a definite splitting dichotomy, and it has to do, I dare to say, with how many people are willing to let that needle go in, because the software is going in. So I don't know if you're comfortable about talking about that here.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly comfortable, but the censors, they're the ones that will like.
I think it's important for people to recognize that it's software, and then we can let them take it from there as far as how much they understand what I'm trying to convey.
Yeah, that's very important.
And and I'm putting it in a book, so that ought to be interesting for my life expectancy.
Yeah, we shall see. Well, this brings up Elon Musk, because I know he's said some things about AI being a threat, and he's kind of been outspoken saying how dangerous AI is in the future. But at the same time, he's bought a couple of, I think bought at least one AI company. He's developed Neuralink because he thinks that Neuralink is the way for humans to defeat AI. And so, what do you think of that? Is Musk a white hat, a black hat, or is he a gray hat, somewhere in between?
I'll tell you what, I am always warning people, be be a little careful just because he started saying the things we like to hear and this whole number with Twitter. This is a man who wants to drill a hole in your head and implant a computer, not even a chip. And if you see his Neuralink video, he has this depiction where a robot surgeon goes, zoot, 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 comes over, meow, drills a hole in your head, implants a computer, and then zoot, zoot, goes on its way. And so as far as I'm concerned, anybody that wants to plant a computer into someone's brain is questionable. Questionable. I don't trust him. I think that actually, I think he's already hooked up and that he is an AI. And he's said as much. In the video that he does on Neuralink, he says, you know, it's really, I mean, it just goes right in and your hair will cover it up. I could even have it in right now. And I was like, you sure could, Elon. You sure could. So I watch him with a distrust. And like I said, it's one thing to talk about against something. It's another to say, you've already got it in monkeys. You've already got it in other animals that are completely robotized. And that to me is, anybody with a soul could not do something like that to an animal. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of these poor animals. They're completely controlled. Mm-hmm. And that's the work that he's into. He's got his other projects, but he's definitely heavily into Neuralink, and he wants it in humans by 2023, which is coming up.
Well, so, you know, I wonder if he's, you know, one of these figures, kind of like Donald Trump in a way, where in order to survive in the real world of corporate competition, deep state, manipulation, monopolies, that you got to play both sides and somehow find a middle ground for yourself. So is Musk, like Trump, someone that's kind of found a middle ground? Because he does seem to be doing things that is upsetting. That, you know, I always get, I mean, you know, the fact that the deep state media has come out against him, the Biden administration has been kind of like going to great lengths to not give Tesla, his electric car company, any kind of acknowledgement that somewhere along the line, some deep state people are being pissed off, I guess, by Musk. So, you know, is Musk again just one of these guys that has to straddle both factions? But right now we're at the time where it's like you make your decisions. Who are you going to work with? You know, the Earth Alliance and be a force for good, or you're going to try and hold out with the deep state and you know, take the scorched earth policy approach. And I think it looks like Musk is choosing to take a positive approach. I mean, that's what a lot of people are hoping.
That's what I'm hoping. But like I said, we have so many plants in our truther spiritual communities that are posing as leaders, wisdom keepers, etc. And we would be so naive to believe that we would be allowed to expand consciousness, expand our numbers, bring forward more and more truth about what's going on, and that nobody would attempt to interfere or infiltrate our circle or our circuitry of information and consciousness raising. So I'm always a little circumspect when someone comes along and on the one hand is performing a role that absolutely suits the power and then suddenly has a shift. And I hope it's real, but then he should forget the Neuralink process. If that's the case, Neuralink should disappear. So let's see what happens. But if he's a transhumanist, which he is, and if he continues on that path, then I don't trust him. And Mr. T, love him dearly, but the minute he started, I think you and I had a conversation about this, the minute even when he made the decision to move into the fast gear, warp speed, I was still very uncomfortable with that decision. But after he's been away a year, he's still talking about getting your jab. I've got a problem with that. And even though I've been a supporter, I love to stand back and say, okay,
yeah,
I have to think about this a little bit here. What is going on here? How can you do that? How can you tell me to do that if you are who I think you are, who I want you to to be. And it's the same with Musk. If you've got all these good intentions, why are you still planning to drill hole in people's heads?
Yeah, important question. So, on the one hand, we have this kind of transhumanist vision, and there's a lot of energy being expended into making that happen through stealth, as you were saying, through that people allowing something to be put into their body that is software that then sets up the kind of architecture for this transhumanist agenda, and who knows whether Neuralink or whether it's Starlink or some other kind of activation technology is found to kind of move all that into operation, into high gear, or will it be that kind of more organic DNA activation, the 12 strands, the 3 strands DNA activation, the Merkaba body being activated, that organic approach. So what is it that you're doing now to kind of like encourage that more organic, let's awaken this incredible potential we have within our DNA that's kind of lying dormant, for that to be like the highway to the future, as opposed to what the transhumanists and the deep state wants to bring about?
Well, one way is consciousness, raising consciousness, and the other way is technology and machination, altering the divine blueprint, altering the human being. And so these guys, the transhumanists, are talking about human 2.0. We're done with the old model. I mean, they've come out and said this. The old human 1.0 is history. It's flawed. It's inadequate. It's outdated. I'm saying, I kind of like it. You're not going to come along and tell me I'm outdated and I'm flawed. We've already had enough of that, just trying to keep up with all the beauty and all the intense commercialization of product to keep us thinking we're not good enough so that we'll keep buying. But now you want to tell us we're completely at the DNA level, we're defunct, we're no good anymore, we're an old model. No, thank you. So my message for people is, don't give away your humanity. Don't let anything interfere with the divine that is within you. You have everything you need you are perfection. We are perfect beings, from the idea of how everything operates in our electromagnetic biological unit, which is our earthly form of expansive consciousness beings, versus being catapulted into some computer reality where we get to exist in thought. I mean, what is this going to be? We will have no longer have form, but we will have perpetuity in a computer chip. No, thank you. And what really matters here is for people to recognize that they are immortal beings. This is the gist of everything. If you believe that you're a mortal being, as these transhumanists do, because they don't perceive God, they don't perceive spirit. I mean, Harari said, let's forget about this mysterious soul thing and this God thing. I was like, oh, okay. So they believe that there's no future unless it's somehow contained in a chip and carried forward, because they believe they're mortal, not immortal. And we who believe that we are God beings and that this is just one of many locations, experiences, whether we're going to reincarnate again in 3D and manifest form, or whether we're going to ascend to higher levels, we know that we are immortal beings. And man, I stay with that. So nothing's coming into me, never going to happen, that's going to interfere with that sovereignty of soul. I came in a sovereign being and I'm going out sovereign. There's not going to be any attachment here that's going to catapult me into some computer hard drive.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how this is going to evolve. I think for those in our generation, we've made our choice, and I don't think there's anything that's going to shift from that. But of course, we have children, grandchildren, and it's like, well, what kind of a world is are we going to bequeath to them? And obviously we want the best. And certainly, I mean, this transhumanist agenda is something that is, yeah, and I think it needs to be opposed. And I think that the solution is to kind of like really show the full potential we carry within our DNA to exhibit all of these incredible abilities. And those are there, and there are many tools for doing that. And one of the things that I was fascinated by, just reading a little bit about what you were told by the Syrians, was that they said during your Atlantean incarnation, you were the keeper of the crystals. So crystals, what role do they play in helping foster this organic path forward?
Well, suffice to say that the basis of the computer, the entirety of computer reality, is silicon. So crystals are the element that from which computer technology was developed, for starters. Me being the keeper of the crystals, I'm glad you read that. Thank you for mentioning that. In that lifetime, I was a keeper of the crystals, because there were 12, that number keeps coming up, 12 crystal skulls that were utilized in Atlantis, in that later period of Atlantis, as the great computer AI network that opened up all the portals, multi-dimensional portals. These 12, I don't know if they were bequeathed from other dimensions. I believe they were bequeathed from other dimensions, 12 crystal skulls. And the Mayan culture, of course, and other cultures have honored that information, because I believe the Mayans, Quetzalcoatl was an Atlantean. So they received that Atlantean information as well. And that union of those 12 crystal skulls, according to the Syrians, when they were together, they manifested a 13th skull, which was not of a physical dimension. And then it just blew everything wide open. So your question was, what was your question? I'm sorry, I'm on a runaway here.
Yeah, no, I was just very intrigued by the importance of crystals for this activating the inherent DNA within us, all of these abilities that we have locked up within us that are kind of like lying dormant there. How do crystals activate that? I'm just kind of fascinated by that. And I saw this mention of you being the keeper of, or a keeper of the crystals. And so now you mentioned the 12 crystal skulls. So I have to kind of do a follow-up there as like, well, did that Indiana Jones movie, was that soft disclosure?
Well, it took from the Atlantean myth and the Mayan myth and built on it. I didn't get through, I couldn't watch it. It was so silly, but all right. So crystals have piezoelectric properties that augment energy, that retain energy, and that amplify energy. So how do they work? Well, if you're meditating, for example, if you're working with crystals and you're meditating into the crystals, they have the capacity to expand the experience from a very physical point of view. It's not just a mystical tin hat point of view. They have the property of piezoelectricity. That's why we have a computer industry based on it, on crystals, silicon, right? So that when you're working with metaphorically, what am I saying? Metaphysically, what you project into the crystal will be amplified for you. And if you're working with spirit in a way that you're working with sacred geometric forms and that kind of work, it manifests within the crystal. I've actually had things physically manifest in a crystal when I was meditating and stay there. It's the weirdest thing. I had a pure crystal sphere that I meditated with. I was going to Tibet at the time, and I was working I had a center in Rome called Lightworks, and I was leading a group in meditation. And I had just gotten this sphere, and I used it in the meditation. And when I came out of the meditation, one of the women said, "Oh my God, Patricia, look at that temple inside the sphere." And there was an absolute Tibetan stupa in the middle of the sphere that wasn't there before. So they can alter, they can actually change physically. They're very powerful if you know how to work with crystals, and most ex-Atlanteans do.
So your books have a lot of information in there on a lot of topics, topics that obviously are designed to kind of help elevate human consciousness, activate the DNA, help us reestablish connections with our extraterrestrial ancestors, and to really help us integrate with a cosmic culture, civilization. So your books have been coming out, I think, since mid-1990s. I think your first one was written, but then recently you had your book publisher cancel all your books. What happened? Just walk us through that.
Yes, I've been cancel cultured. So I was with one publisher, North Atlantic Books, for 15, 18 years. And they put out a flyer about the new direction of the company and how they were, got to choose my words here. They were militant. They were militant about the rights of a shifting society and how we all had to get behind the Black Lives Matter movement and many of these things. And I got this email from them, and this was the position of our company. And I wrote back and I said, "Well, thank you for your message, but wow, it's pretty militant, isn't it? I mean, let's not forget that love is what heals. And let's try to come from love here." And shortly thereafter, they canceled all my books. Thanks a lot. It's been real. It was nice working with you, because I dared to challenge that position. Now, my books, I have 12 books published with them that have been selling for years, selling well, and sought after by people. Usually people, if they read one of my books, they read many of my books, right? Gone. And so, I also get royalties from these books. So gone was also that revenue. Just thanks a lot, but no thanks. And it was quite a shock to me, because now people can't get my books. But the good news is I just took it in my stride. And I thought, well, okay, fine, arrivederci, I'll find another way. And fortunately, immediately after that, I was approached by Inner Traditions, who you probably know is a very big publisher. And they asked me, would I come and join them? So I've written this new book for them, which is now in the publishing process. It's going to take a while to get it out. And eventually they're going to republish those old books. But it's very frustrating, because the material, back in 1997, when that first book came out, it was mind-blowing information. I mean, that's 25 years ago. And I was talking about, I was one of the first people to ever talk about chemtrails and HARP and all of that information, geoengineering. So they're not just, consciousness, ET kinds of information. There was also hard-hitting information about what's going on the planet, what we're dealing with, how to cope with it, how to face the truth, which was, ahead of its time profusely when I first brought that out. But now it's very, very hard for people to get their hands on my books. So all I can say is, please don't give up. I'm trying to get them out as quickly as I can to get them republished.
No, I've never heard that before, that a publisher will cancel a whole line of books. I mean, one book, sure. I mean, I can understand one book, they might come up with some justification for doing that. But for just you not going along with a new company policy, that your whole series of books would be canceled, that's kind of like weird. I mean, I'm kind of like surprised that there hasn't been litigation over this, but it makes me ask the question: was this a kind of a facade or a maneuver by the deep state to get rid of your material at a time when it could make a difference?
Very possible. I was cancel cultured. It wasn't the books that were canceled, it was me, right? And years ago, I also got a visit from some dudes that claimed they were from they claimed they were big fans and they just couldn't wait to talk to me about my books. And then when I met up with them, the male, there were a man and a woman, he flashed a badge on the table and it was the director of CIA, NATO, Southern Europe. And I said, so what exactly are we doing here in this meeting? Why are you even, I mean, the director of CIA, wow, I guess you're buying lunch. But underneath the table, my legs were shaking because I thought, uh-oh. And he told me that my third book, No More Secrets, No More Lies, his words were, it really pushes the envelope. I said, so what are you doing? Are you here to threaten me or what? He said, no, we're just curious. We want to know a lot. We really love your work. We'd like to know more how you receive these messages. And I said, well, I'm in the love zone. I'm not in the military band frequency, if that's what you think. I'm in the love zone and you're not in it. So you're never going to be able to understand it. But I was warned. And again, it was 1997. That's a long time ago. And I was talking about stuff that is still truthers are discovering now. So they didn't really love the idea that I was bringing it forward. In fact, in that meeting, I said, look, I said to him, so do I need to be careful when I walk off the sidewalk? And he said, Patricia, if they wanted you dead, you'd be dead by now. I said, so what do they want? And they, aren't you they? And he said, just know that it's pushing the envelope.
Right.
So it could very well be that I pushed the envelope too far with my last book. But guess what? Read my lips. I will continue to do that until I'm dead, because I know no other way to be than to speak that truth as I understand it. And then the new one really pushes the envelope.
So again, just kind of like tell us when that's out and how people can get it.
Okay, so unfortunately, it's only just, I just finished it last month, so it's got to go through the publishing process. It probably won't be out for about a year, but it will be with Inner Traditions, which is a wonderful publisher, very expansive. And so far, of course, I don't know if they've read it yet. They might have a heart attack when they read it, because they gave me carte blanche. We want a book from Patricia Cori, go for it. So anyway, I think it'll be out in a year, hopefully sooner, and it'll be available everywhere. And then for my old books, people are struggling to find them, and all I can say is don't give up. There are some used copies. You get the occasional bookstore that has them. Look for them and know that I'm doing my best to get them republished. But isn't that a shocker, huh? Cancel cultured.
Totally, especially given
overnight, pow, 12 books gone.
12 books and all of that information in there, including the Syrian revelations, all of that is gone. So at the moment, people will not be able to buy one of your books. So that's saying something that you've been, I think it's more than cancel cultured. I think you were targeted. I mean, I've known for a long time now that the deep state targets contactees, tries to make their lives as difficult as possible, try to make them economically as insecure as possible. I mean, this is how they forced one of my sources, longtime sources, JP. They maneuvered him to join the military because he was for years was struggling to survive, living on odd jobs, and I'm trying to encourage him, helping him out here and there. But at the end of the day, I mean, he has 2 children, a wife. He had to join the military because that's where he was being pushed. And that's what happens to a lot of contactees. It's either you join us or we're going to make your life as miserable and as difficult as possible.
Yeah, well, ugh. I want to say that I moved to a place where life is very simple. The cost of living is really pretty low. People are connected to the earth. It's underpopulated here on the Azores. And I'm living a pretty simple life. And I've got no debt. And I'm a prepper. So yeah, it was painful when they just zapped out the revenue of 12 books, the royalties of 12 books that were constantly selling. And it was just overnight. Goodbye. Thank you. It's been real. It wasn't even up for negotiation. It was the new owner of the company just said, It's been very nice. Thank you. We've had a nice time with you, but we're moving on. We're moving in another direction. So I was like, oh, okay. Thank you very much.
So
And you know, it's shocking to me to see how people turn, how these people that you collaborate with for 15, 16 years, there's no humanity. It's just goodbye. But we deal with it the best we can. And my way is, I actually laughed when it happened because it was so absurd that I thought, wow, I guess you're not supposed to disagree. And I'm a rebel. I've always been a rebel. I'm not going with the tide here.
I'm glad you are. We need the rebels, definitely.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for being on the show. So if people want to find out more about you or get in contact with you, where do they go?
My website is patriciacori.com, and that's Cori, C-O-R-I. And I'm on very little social media. I've cut back, but I am on Facebook, and I do answer people if they write to me through my website, so they can find me there. Oh, and I do have a YouTube channel, which I've been a little slow lately because I've been writing, so I haven't been doing any interviews, but I'll be back up and running on there as well.
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.